Hey everyone, welcome back. We're tackling a topic today that I know a lot of you are curious about: gluten-free lifestyles and all those health benefits we keep hearing about. In fact, you sent in this article from the Gluten-Free podcast, catchy name, right? Called 14 Gluten-Free Health Benefits.
Grain of truth in a wheatless world.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to try to separate the hype from the reality, figure out what's what.
Sounds like a plan. It's definitely a hot topic these days, lots to unpack.
No kidding. This article really grabbed my attention right from the start. It mentioned that between 2006 and 2015, searches for gluten-free diet in the U.S. went from like almost nothing to 95%. That's huge. What's behind that kind of shift? Well, there are a few things at play here. For one, there's definitely more awareness about celiac disease and gluten sensitivity now, which is a good thing. But on the flip side, the gluten-free market has exploded. Companies are marketing these products like crazy, and that can lead to what we call the health halo effect.
The health halo. Tell me more about that.
Basically, people see something labeled gluten-free and automatically assume it's healthier, even if it's not.
So it's like this magical word that makes everything seem better.
Exactly. And look, it's not to say that there aren't legitimate reasons to avoid gluten, but it's important to understand the whole picture.
Absolutely. So let's dive into some of those legitimate reasons. The article starts with celiac disease, calling it the toxic X you have to ditch. Sounds pretty serious.
It is. For people with celiac disease, going gluten-free isn't a choice, it's essential. Their body sees gluten as an invader and attacks the small intestine. It can cause a whole bunch of health issues.
So no more like cheat days with a bagel here and there.
Not if they want to manage their condition, no. A strict gluten-free diet is the only way to let their gut heal properly.
Got it. So that's celiac disease. But what about everyone else who's going gluten-free? This article lists a ton of potential benefits: more energy, weight loss, even clearer skin. It's pretty tempting stuff.
I hear you. And while it's true that some people do experience these benefits, it's not a universal experience. Everyone's different. What works wonders for one person might not do a thing for another.
So how do we figure out what's real and what's, well, wishful thinking?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's exactly why we're here today.
Right. So where do we even start?
I think a good place to start is by debunking some common myths, like this idea that gluten-free equals healthy. If you're swapping out whole grain bread for processed gluten-free snacks loaded with sugar, well, that's not exactly a win.
Yeah, that's like trading one problem for another.
Exactly. Another thing to consider is the placebo effect.
Okay, I've heard of that, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it means.
It's pretty simple, actually. The placebo effect is when you experience a benefit from something just because you believe it's working, even if it's not actually doing anything.
So someone might feel amazing on a gluten-free diet just because they think it's healthier, even if they don't have a real intolerance.
Precisely. The power of the mind is pretty amazing. Now, that's not to say that all the benefits are in our heads. There are definitely people who experience real, positive changes when they ditch gluten, even without celiac disease. But it's crucial to be aware of all the factors at play.
That makes total sense. So how do we separate those real benefits from the placebo effect? This article mentions a bunch of them. Let's start with bloating. That seems to be a big one.
It is. And look, gluten can contribute to bloating for some people, but it's not the only culprit. Things like certain types of carbs, food sensitivities, even how fast you eat those can all lead to bloating.
So cutting out gluten might help, but it's not a guaranteed fix.
Exactly. And it's really important to remember that bloating on its own isn't always a sign of a serious medical problem. But if it's constant or you've got other digestive issues, talk to a doctor, rule out anything more serious.
Great point. We don't want people self-diagnosing based on, a podcast. Speaking of, this article also talked about gluten and energy levels.
Yeah, lots of people say they feel more energized when they ditch gluten. Again, there are a few possible reasons for that.
Like what?
Could be that cutting out gluten reduces inflammation in their gut, and that gives them a boost. Or, like we were saying, it could be the placebo effect. Who knows? Plus, a lot of those gluten-free products out there, they can be lower in protein than the stuff they're replacing. And protein is what keeps you going, right?
Good point.
Yeah.
It's not just about what you aren't eating. You got to pay attention to what you're putting in your body. Maybe skip that gluten-free muffin before hitting the gym. All right, let's talk weight loss. The article touched on that some people say they shed pounds when they ditch gluten. Is there any truth to that?
It's not that gluten itself is making people gain weight. It's more like when you go gluten-free, you might naturally end up eating less processed foods, and those tend to be calorie bombs.
So it's more about those healthier choices overall, not specifically about cutting out gluten.
Exactly. Plus, think about it. Gluten-free stuff can be pricey. People might start paying more attention to their grocery budget, maybe cutting back a bit overall, which could lead to weight loss.
Interesting. That makes sense. Okay, what about some of these other claims? The article mentioned a link between going gluten-free and clearer skin.
Honestly, there's not a lot of strong science to back that up for everyone. Some people with skin conditions like eczema or psoriasis, they might see improvements, but it's probably more about reducing inflammation overall, not gluten itself.
So a potential benefit, but not a guaranteed one, like a lot of these things. What about mood? They talked about a gluten-free diet leading to a better mood. What's the deal with that?
That's a really interesting area. Researchers are learning more and more about this thing called the gut-brain connection, how what's going on in your gut can affect your brain, including your mood. Some studies suggest gluten might be messing with that balance for some people.
So it's possible, but we need more research to say for sure.
Exactly. It's still early days for that kind of research.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the practical side of things. One thing that jumped out at me in this article was the cost. They said gluten-free products can be over 200% more expensive. That's wild.
Yeah, it's a huge difference, and I'll be honest, that can be a real barrier for people. It's tough to stick with a gluten-free lifestyle long term if you're on a tight budget.
So any advice for people who are trying to make it work without, breaking the bank?
Absolutely. First off, don't think you have to live on those prepackaged gluten-free products. Focus on naturally gluten-free foods. Fruits, veggies, lean proteins, things like quinoa and rice.
Go back to basics.
Exactly. And if you can, buy in bulk when you can. Oh, and check out those online support groups and forums. People share tons of tips and recipes for affordable gluten-free living.
That's super helpful. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, besides the cost, what else should people consider before they take the plunge and go gluten-free?
Well, first things first, don't just assume you need to cut out gluten.
Right. No self-diagnosing based on a hunch or something you read online.
Exactly. If you think you might have a gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, get tested. Talk to your doctor. They can figure out if you have a real medical reason to avoid gluten.
I'm guessing those tests are more accurate than just like experimenting on yourself.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, cutting out gluten before you get tested can mess with the results.
Good to know. So talk to a doctor, get tested if you need to. Don't just jump on the bandwagon without a good reason. What else?
Well, you have to be mindful of what you're replacing the gluten with. Gluten-containing grains, they've got nutrients, fiber, iron, B vitamins. If you're not careful, you could end up with some deficiencies.
So maybe supplements or just being really aware of getting those nutrients from other sources.
Exactly. And last but not least, don't underestimate the social side of things. Eating gluten-free, it can be tricky sometimes, especially if you're eating out,
It's
traveling.
true. You don't want to feel like you're being difficult or missing out. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The potential benefits, the myths, the costs, the importance of talking to a doctor, the social side of things. What else is there?
It all boils down to making informed choices, right? One of the most important things you can do if you're thinking about a gluten-free lifestyle is really understand your why.
Yeah, don't just do it because it's trendy or because your friend is doing it.
Right. Ask yourself, what am I hoping for? What are my goals here? If it's specific symptoms you're dealing with, yeah, maybe going gluten-free is worth exploring, but talk to your doctor first.
And be realistic about the challenges like we were talking about. The cost, the social stuff, it's not a walk in the park, and it's not for everyone.
Definitely not. It's all about finding what works for you, your needs, your life.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Eh.
So it seems like the biggest takeaway from our deep dive today is that going gluten-free can be a game changer for some people, especially those with celiac disease or a real sensitivity to gluten. But it's not a magic cure-all, and it comes with its own set of hurdles.
So listeners, as you're navigating this whole gluten-free world, be curious, ask questions, and most importantly, make the choices that feel right for you. And hey, when in doubt, talk to a healthcare professional. Get that personalized advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. See you next time.